everybody. Welcome to yet another episode
of We're Not Fun. Some of us are finer than others.
We had this dude write in response to our jealousy of workplace. Can opposite sex people be friends? We had a person write, honestly, the most beautiful email to us saying he's kind of in trouble with his spouse regarding his work relationships with women. And I am so impressed with how this person wrote. I'm so grateful that the podcast triggered him. He said he loves the podcast, which I'm sure you're going to read when you read the response. And I'm sorry, though, that you're struggling with it, which, Talia, go ahead and read this gorgeous email that we got.
I know, it's incredible. And I will say nothing lights Doug and I up more than engagement with the people listening to us.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. First of all, I wanted to say I love your podcast. Go on, John. I just listened to your opposite sex friendship episode from July 2024, and this topic has turned into a marriage nightmare for me, and now I need some advice. As a male with a lot of female colleagues, I really think these kind of platonic friendships have to be possible, unless I see it as a sad, sad world. I have a creative job where I work mostly with women. I've got several female colleagues. There's one person I work a lot with, about 80% of the time, and we do most of our projects together. We have a great time at work, and our friendship is purely platonic. We do not meet up privately, but we enjoy working and spending time together. Our work also requires social gatherings in evenings and sometimes weekends. None of our work is secret, and my spouse has always been free to read the messages we exchange. Awesome, John. Awesome.
Seriously. No.
I don't have a lot of friends, but I love being social with my professional network. I also have my colleagues in social media, and I care about them and their families. Now, my spouse has turned against me and claims that I message these friend and this one female especially too frequently, and that the friendship is too close because it presents a potential risk of infidelity. My spouse denies that this is jealousy, but instead insists that it's obvious I'm doing something wrong and I've crossed a boundary. I believe this is well within the trust we should have in each other, and that it's not a problem as long as it remains a platonic friendship centered around work. There are no romantic or sexual undertones or signals, just a friendly dynamic with a lot of humor. We're in couples therapy. I really want to save this relationship, which has lasted for over 20 years. But if I end up having to quit my job and turn my back to my friends, I'm afraid I'll be bitter forever. I've started thinking my wife maybe sees a friendship, quote unquote, as something more intimate and close than I do. That might also be a big difference between men and women, he's asking. The question might be, is it possible to have friends of the opposite sex? What is a friend?
Okay.
Doug, what do you think about this?
Oh,
I know.
I don't even know where to start. I'm actually going to go. So what I've done is kind of formulated my thoughts about a number of pieces of this particular email. Thank you very much, John, for listening. Thank you for your support of our podcast. I do appreciate that. I want to say something. You are sounding incredibly clear on what your relationship is with your coworkers, particularly the one that you're closest to. You're feeling very, very solid about this is platonic. There's nothing more. I'm not doing anything that would suggest that it's anything more. So I think letting your spouse, and I think, Talia, you kind of commented on this as you were reading it, letting your spouse read your text, letting them see the communication is a great way to alleviate concerns because there's no secrecy. And I'm a huge person on transparency in a relationship. Do I think you need to share your phone and have it open to everybody all the time? I don't know. I think that's varied from person to person. I would not want to be in a relationship where I constantly felt the need to check my person or person's phones. I just wouldn't want that dynamic. I think it speaks to like a tension or an insecurity or a lack of trust in the relationship, and hopefully that builds. But anyway, since you are sharing it, I think that's a great strategy to kind of alleviate some of her concerns about your relationship. I also want to say, you comment on loving your professional network, and I love how you talk about your work. I wish everybody was so joyous about, where they worked and what they did for a professional life. And I sense you really like what you do. And inevitably, like Talia and I, you meet people within your own career that naturally share an interest, right? I can't tell you how many therapist friends I have. It's kind of a nightmare because we constantly therapize each other and we support each other that way, but it's also the best thing ever. Like, we get free therapy all the fucking time. I actually talked to you about something this morning, and
I
that,
know. What would we do without it? I mean, there are so many benefits of
I agree
having
with.
a work spouse.
And I really, by the way, even formulating and what you and I do on this podcast about, like, taking a look at this particular issue, it's really valuable. Like, I think there's something to be said about just really throwing out ideas and challenging each other. I want to go to your comment up next about, like, my spouse has turned against me. That
Mm.
felt really awful. It felt like you're feeling attacked and on the defense. And I really hate that for you. I don't think that's healthy. And I don't think that's a good long term kind of dynamic in a relationship, because that can breed contempt and, as you said, bitterness. So I want to say, she almost feels like she's justifying. I don't know your spouse, obviously, but it feels like she's justifying herself by saying, everyone knows this is inappropriate. I don't. I'm someone who's going to say, Talia and I talk a ton. We text a bunch of stuff. Instagram, sometimes I'll be sitting there and I'll send 15 Instagrams, and we know what we don't like, and so we send each other those as well. Like the guys like it.
Like Doug's favorite algorithm is when whomever, whatever, has like a blanket, they're hiding themselves, and then they rip the blanket away, and then they're not there, except it's done poorly. Like Doug's favorite is when it's like an enormous bear or like a really large human that's hiding behind like a flagpole, and you can still see
So I want to say, like, I really feel like, in terms of all of this, the bottom line is that this is a platonic relationship. And I believe you, John. I got to tell you, you're using a ton of words and a ton of exclamations and a ton of declarations that I think really indicate to me that you're not having any sort of inappropriate relationship. What I don't love is that she's making you feel, and I guess maybe I should reword that. Her behavior leads you to feel like you're doing something wrong, and it's not going to work well long term. You can't feel shamed and blamed for something you're not doing. That feels really irrational and distorted. And I want to comment a little bit here about attachment style, which we've talked about a number of times on this podcast. I think she has a very anxious attachment style, and that can come from previous betrayals. It can come from a history of not being able to trust other partners. It can come from a parental child relationship that she had growing up where, her parents were not consistent about their love and their regard and their consistency. And so she's kind of constantly looking for there to be a break in that, or a betrayal of that. And it's just not healthy. Like, I think that's her work, which kind of brings me to the couples therapy comment. I'm kind of curious what your couples therapist, because I would go after this directly. Like, does your couples therapist observe what feels like an irrational insecurity or an irrational question about whether or not you're cheating? I just don't think it's there. So I think there is something going on. And the bottom line, so I would go to your couples therapist if you haven't, and say, I'm so worried about this. If it hasn't been clarified what this issue is, that you bring to us as well, because she's got to work on trusting you when there's nothing to be distrusting about. Honestly, John, if you quit your job, I think you're going to be bitter forever. I think you like your job. I think it's a rare circumstance. We live in really weird times where people are struggling to find employment. We've had a lot of job cuts in this United States. I won't even comment on that from a political point. But the bottom line is that, having a job that you love is fantastic. I suggest you stick with it and make it work. And I also think, going back to the couples therapy, and we're going to talk about this a little bit at the end here about, like, strategies. I wish for you to do what you need to do with this relationship. I wish for her to get what she needs in terms of security. But if that's an unattainable need, if her needs for you are to not have any females in your life, that's not realistic. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on that, on her part as well. I want to comment on the big difference between men and women. I do think, Talia, and I'd love to hear your point of view on this. Like, I do think we're socialized differently as men versus women. I think I've heard from women, like women are competing for men's attention. Women are in need of having a man in their life. And I find that really concerning as a concept. I'm not saying it's not true, but I find myself really thinking, like, I don't know if she feels like she's competing for your time and attention from this person in your work life, in which case that has to be directly addressed.
But do you know what's so interesting is like I have a really different take.
I love that. That's the whole point. Go ahead. Tell me what your take is, which we don't rehearse this, guys. So I don't even know what your take is.
No, and I kind of love it when I listen to you talk and I'm like, oh wow, I am not seeing it that way at all. I'm gonna keep noodling on the men and women
It's a
piece
tough one.
because I can think of so many different scenarios where I'm thinking of more exceptions than the rule, right? But I do feel like there's something to be said about heterosexual men and women that are not pod spouses, work spouses, and maybe people of the same sex that are attracted to people of the same sex. Like that feels different. Like if there's a straight woman and a gay man, it's inherently less threatening as a work marriage to the spouses, I would say. So like there's that piece of the male female, maybe a straight gay dynamic. But other than that, I think everybody is pretty vulnerable in some ways to feeling really connected to your work spouse and having that emotional connection, maybe light up your brain in a different way than normal relationships. And I also feel like I don't want to pathologize his wife and say that what she's experiencing is completely abnormal and that she has an insecure attachment and probably, a childhood history of parental abandonment, whatever. But it's also possible that this is just a dynamic that's gone on for a really long time. And that I think that she might be communicating something that's a very normal and natural experience, communicating about it badly. I think she has some unmet needs. I think she's jealous of really precious resources. Like emotional intimacy is a precious resource. Like, do spouses want their partners to have an incredibly emotionally intimate relationship with other people they could potentially be attracted to? I don't know. Time, sort of like the effort and the laughter and the connecting and the collaborating, the enthusiasm, like these are all resources that I feel like if someone is jealous that their spouse is having this kind of a relationship, what I want you to do is take a temperature of your relationship and make sure that your partner's work relationship isn't the only place they're getting validation and feeling valued and having a good time. Like, is home emotionally safe and connected and beautiful? And are you someone that's easy to talk to? And are you interested in their work life? And are you interested in the cast of characters? Doug, I like have the 25 signs that you have a work wife or husband. I kind of want to read those because I want people to hear how all of these signs are what you should be looking for, what you should actually have in your actual marriage.
Right. Well, and let me point out before you do that. Feel free to
Yeah.
do that, of course. But I find myself wanting to acknowledge the whole work marriage or work spouse issue because
Yeah.
that's a phrase that you're using that some other
Yeah.
people might use too. But it can be easily perceived as well. Like when we go to the restaurant after our podcast recordings, and Rob and I are both there, you'll say, "This is my home spouse and this is my work spouse."
Yeah, I've got two husbands. I
That's
should
right.
be on a like polygamy documentary.
So, well, this is what I would say about that, though. I think the word can be triggering, right? Except that that's the reality. I think we like certain people, and we oftentimes,
Yeah.
of course, have things in common with people who work in the same space. We use them to, when there's a rough experience, if there's a redo of the administrative chart or something, like a reorganization, I should say. Like, I think people rely on each other for support. So, yeah, I mean, I think just wanting to acknowledge that the word that we're using is one that a lot of people use, but might trigger this particular woman in this relationship. Go ahead.
Okay, so I feel like, and I'm going to try to just move quickly through them and stop me if you have any thoughts about it. But like these 25 signs are probably exactly what your romantic relationship, marriage, long term relationship started out like.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You message each other all day. You share inside jokes about work and life. They're the person you go to when anything goes wrong, or if there's good news, you know each other's quirks and habits. You defend each other. You bring each other coffee or snacks. You bounce ideas off of each other. You exchange knowing glances from across a room. They're there for you if you need to vent. You help each other through hard things. You understand and respect each other's workload, challenges, and responsibilities. This one, I just feel like needs a lot of work in most marriages. So, like, everyone should be keeping their eye on this to make sure their marriage still feels like some of these things.
Yeah.
You're bummed when they're not in the office. You trust their judgment, you respect their opinion. Um, they help you pick up the slack when you're having a bad day. You love to grab lunch together when you can. You cover for each other. You always are drawn to sit next to each other. That sounds like a great marriage in work or at home, don't you think?
I do think so, Talia. And, it kind of speaks to what it is that I was mostly curious about and kind of, formulating a thought process for these two is to really take a look at, are there things missing? Are there things that in a valid, and it has to be valid though. I mean, I think we can't, I think there's something, by the way, about getting your needs met in different places that's really healthy.
Yeah.
You have a lot of
Yes.
conversations. We've never had an episode on this, but can you get everything met by one person? For a lot
No,
of people, that would feel suffocating. That would feel like too much of
absolutely.
a demand or pressure, right? So I find myself thinking, Talia, like all these things are beautiful. They're really great indicators. And, you said something like this is what is common at the beginning of a romantic relationship. I hope that it's something that's forever in the
Me
relationship. I
too.
hope that, you kind of have to keep that momentum going. And I always say this about relationships, like you have to keep communicating about your wants and needs and thoughts and feelings about the relationship and keep navigating and growing. And, the healthiest relationships grow old together with similar goals, which change over time. But I would say this. I mean, I think you're right. I think there's a part of this that is something missing in this relationship. Is John bringing home? Are you bringing home, John? Are you bringing home these beautiful things to your spouse? Is she
Right.
getting what she needs? And I would ask if, however, and you and I might see this a little bit differently based on what he's writing, because I feel like he's really fair. Like I think this is a very objective thing. He's not putting his spouse down. He's not criticizing her. He's
Nope.
contemplating like, what do I need to do to save this? He's saying the relationship is really important. Which when you and I work with couples, oftentimes we'll say, "What's your motivation to change?" And if it's not high, that's a concern. But this guy really wants to make this work. So when I look at
Yes.
this, ask her what she needs. But if she says you will never have a female friend, that's irrational.
Well, of
It's
course.
destroying.
And I don't think she's saying that. I think it feels
I
that
don't
way
know.
because John, his closest connections, he says he doesn't have a lot of friends outside of work. These are his
Which
people.
is common, by the way,
Very
right?
common. I mean, and I feel like even if we think about like we should be encouraging our spouses to have a fulfilling life and have other emotional connections that are wonderful for them. Like the more rich and beautiful our partners' lives are,
Yeah.
the better mood they're in, the healthier they are, the richer our relationship, the more stories. And so the dynamic there though, I feel like if we're kind of transitioning into talking about like, okay, how do we make how do we make it more successful? How do we navigate work spouse relationships so that they're not as threatening or there isn't such a scarcity of resources? It's really important to bring your spouse into some of these stories and to be talking about your work spouse in a way that doesn't feel threatening. And I mean, one thing that Rob does, because I mean, my husband has a work spouse who is stunning and brilliant, and in fact his boss. And so they are chatting all the time, they laugh all the time, they cry I mean, it's like, it is intense, and there is shit going down, and they're there for each other. However, he talks about her. I've met her. I love her. She's so warm towards me. She connects with me. She texts me and says, "Oh my God, Talia, I am so sorry. It's a shit show. I promise. Like, Rob is all yours. You'll have him back. I'm trying to wrap this up." Or, and it's not often. It's not like inappropriate. It's just beautiful. She navigates it so beautifully. My husband navigates it so beautifully. I don't feel on the outside. I love, I talk about he talks to me about that relationship, and I love their relationship. If I were less secure, I would feel like, oh my gosh, that relationship has every ingredient a potential affair would need. Every ingredient.
If I were your couples therapist for you and Rob, I would seriously say, is there any reality to that? Is there any fact you have? And part of it is you reality testing in that circumstance. If, however, you got a text from his boss saying, "I'm going after your man,"
right, then maybe that would be a different story.
But we have to reality test, guys. Like,
I
we
know.
have to kind of not create drama and create chaos and create strain in our relationships by making up stuff that's not true. We have to stay reality focused, right? And we have to stay honest. And it's okay to feel that way. Like, there's so many people that you and I work with that have insecurity based on abuse or
Yes.
abandonment or neglect, all of the things, or dysfunctional family patterns, alcoholism, substance abuse disorders, all of the things that are ingredients to create insecurity. I've got those myself from my own childhood. But that's the thing. Like, if we have those things, we have to own that we have those things, and remember that we're not the same person, that we have to individuate from that person too, and know that that person gets to have a life that's based on their own wants and needs as well. If it's something, and by the way, the other reality, and I haven't said this, but if this person that you're with cannot handle it, it might be a deal breaker for her. And you have to decide.
Wife can't handle it.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
Like, there are times that people have deal breakers in relationships, but I've told people who have these, betrayals in their past and abuse in their past, be upfront with it in your dating experience. Be upfront with people that this
own your own.
I might need a little more security. I'm going to own it up front, and I'm not going to go off on you about things that are irrational. And I'm in fact going to ask for what I need in order to feel secure, which kind of brings us back to those things that you said about those 25 things. If there are missing pieces, let's deal with it.
Well, and that's why and I know Doug, I can speak for Doug. We are so happy you're in couples therapy. Like, this is brilliant. It's exactly what you need to be doing. And I would say, like, if I were the couples therapist, I would have advice for you, John, and advice for your wife. And my advice for you, John, would be really honest with yourself. Is it possible that even though your wife can always look at your text messages, is it possible you're not showing up with the same amount of, like, warmth, love, enthusiasm, inside jokes, connection, collaboration at home? Is it possible you could invite your wife, invite your worlds together? You said you care a lot about your coworkers and you care about their families. Maybe you guys are so close and so connected that you can invite your wife to be a part of some happy hour so she can meet the cast of characters, so it can feel less threatening. She'll see these are beautiful, legitimate relationships, and if they're open to her, I think it will take away so much of the threat. And also for your wife, I would recommend, if she's listening, to really ask yourself, are you jealous? Is John really doing anything wrong? Or do you need a little more transparency? Do you wish there were a little more boundaries around, like, can you not be texting while we're snuggled and watching a show, or while we're at dinner? Can there be some boundaries around that? Or I'd like to meet them, or I'd really want to be more of a part of it. Or for your wife, can you be a warmer, more engaged, more interested party when you're asking about John's work life, so he doesn't feel like he has to choose between the joy he gets at work and his home life? I don't know. Those might be my parting words.
No, I think those are good parting words. And I think that's where we encourage this. I think you also, at the end of this email to us, John, you or this communication, you said, can you have friends of the opposite sex? 100%. I
Absolutely.
gotta,
Well,
no,
it's
no,
complicated.
I don't
You
know.
have to do it right.
Well, but I honestly, like, again, I have a bunch of hockey friends, all of which are straight dudes. I don't go after them. I don't have inappropriate
But they're
relationships.
straight dudes. What if you were in a really serious relationship, but you were surrounded by and working with really sexy gay men?
I am in my practice.
It's,
Um,
that's probably true. It's
yeah.
just I feel like you have to navigate it well, but it's
So
it's absolutely possible if you're navigating it well.
100%. You also at the end, and I apologize, I could go on and on about this. What is a friend? We'll probably need to get Nina back on our podcast to talk about friendship and,
Oh,
what a friend is, because that varies from person to person. John, I want to conclude with saying I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I'm very grateful that you're working on your relationship with a therapist. I also want to say it's very clear your motivation is to make this work. So just listen and try to understand what's going on for her.
that's
You
right.
don't have to like change your life to accommodate that. You just have to make sure that she's getting what she wants and needs to create security. And it might be a
And that you are as well.
Yep, and it might be a process. It might take time, but you're on the right track. Thank you so much for writing in.
Oh my gosh. You guys, thank you so much. We hope you found value from today. If you want to find us on social media, please do. On Instagram, it's Dr. Talia Jackson. It's Douglas L. Jensen with an EN, and We're Not Fine Pod.
And of course, we have a website where John found us called we'renotfine.com. And the truth of the matter is, you can write into us about anything. You can write in about this. John, we welcome you to respond again and let us know how it's going.
That's fun.
And how this felt to you, but also if you're in any circumstance or you have any other questions that you'd like us to talk about related to the combination and the impact of mental health on relationships, please contact us again at we'renotfine.com.
And like, share, subscribe. If you love us, if you hate us, it doesn't matter. We're sort of like put on this planet for some infamy. So just like put us out there. We love you guys. And we'll
care
see
of
you next
yourself.
time.
All right, bye-bye.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website, and because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.